So we are live now.
All right, great. Are we ready to start?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for... Go ahead and start. Okay, sorry. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Akila Radhakrishnan, the president of the Global Justice Center, and I'll be your moderator. And I welcome you all on behalf of GROUP. The Global Justice Center is an international human rights organization dedicated to advancing gender equality through the rule of law. We combine legal analysis with strategic advocacy to ensure equal protection of the law for women and girls. I'm going to start just with a little bit of housekeeping. So in terms of how we're going to run the show today, we're first going to hear a few brief opening remarks from our panelists. And then after that, we'll have a moderated discussion between them. Feel free to ask any questions that you want in the Q&A box, and we will be getting to audience questions after the moderated discussion. You can ask the questions at any time, and we'll be monitoring them throughout the event. So to quickly get us started, I'm going to frame the discussion. So we're now 4 months into the illegal military coup that began on February 1st. In Myanmar, over 800 people have been killed, over 5,000 arrested, and there have been reports of torture, sexual and gender-based violence, and other human rights abuses. The people of the country have bravely risen up in opposition through a sustained peaceful protest movement, and duly elected members of parliament and other leaders have formed a parallel government. Meanwhile, the international community has on the whole failed to take any meaningful action outside of a few states who've imposed targeted sanctions. A process initiated by ASEAN excluded any representative of the civilian government and was immediately flouted by Min Aung Hlaing and the military. And in the meantime, human rights abuses continue, and for particularly vulnerable groups like the Rohingya, the coup has only exacerbated and lengthened the situation that they face. And so this is the context for the discussion that we're going to be having today. And we have some incredible panelists who are all experts on the various issues that we're going to be talking about. So let me briefly introduce them. So first we have Thinsar Chunli Yi. Chunli Yi is a youth advocate and activist based in Yangon. She's highly passionate about democracy and human rights, youth engagement, and local governance. Over 2012 to 2016, Chunli Yi co-organized and led nationwide regional youth forums in Myanmar, as well as the National Youth Development Policy process. She was the first woman coordinator of the National Youth Congress and a 2-term president of the Yangon Youth Network. Thinsar is currently an advocacy lead at the Asian Youth Pacific Network. Our next panelist is Tun Kin. Tun Kin is an ethnic Rohingya Muslim from Arakan State in Myanmar and the president of the Burmese Rohingya Organization UK and a prominent activist for the Rohingya people. Tun Kin's tireless advocacy for the Rohingya cause has taken him around the globe several times over. He has spoken about the genocide facing the Rohingya before the US Congress, European Parliament, European Human Rights Council, the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, and other UN bodies. Our next panelist needs almost no introduction. It's Ambassador Stephen Rapp. Ambassador Rapp is the former US Ambassador at Large for War Crimes Issues in the Office of Global Criminal Justice. You should really think of shortening that title.
I know it. You can do it any way you want.
From 2009 to 2015, he coordinated as ambassador with the US government to support international criminal tribunals, hybrid tribunals, and national courts prosecuting international crimes. From 2017 to 2009, Ambassador Rapp served as prosecutor of the Special Court for Sierra Leone, where he led the prosecution of former Liberian President Charles Taylor. And from 2001 to 2007, he served as senior trial attorney and chief of prosecutions at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. He is currently a visiting fellow at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, serving in an advisory capacity as roving ambassador for the Simon Gold Center for the Prevention of Genocide, pursuing justice and accountability on Syria. Next up, we have Arslan Suleiman. Arslan Suleiman is counsel in Foley Hoag's international litigation and arbitration practice, who serves on the legal team representing the Gambia in the Rohingya genocide case and argued part of the case before the ICJ in December 2019. He's the former acting U.S. Special Envoy to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. At the State Department, Arslan also served as counselor for multilateral affairs in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. Arslan is a non-resident fellow at Georgetown University's Institute for the Study of Diplomacy. And last but certainly not least, we have Erin Farrell Rosenberg. Aaron is an adjunct professor at the University of Cincinnati School of Law and an attorney specializing in international criminal law and reparations, having worked at the ICTY and the International Criminal Court. She's the former senior advisor for the Center for Prevention of Genocide at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, where she was the lead author of the report series, Practical Prevention, How the Genocide Convention's Obligation to Prevent applies to Burma. She's a member of the editorial committee of the Journal of International Criminal Justice and the ABA Working Group on Crimes Against Humanity. So as you can hear, all of our panelists are incredibly qualified, and I'm really looking forward to a good discussion today. So we're going to start with Shinli. So you're one of the young activists at the center of the protest movement in the country. And one remarkable thing we've seen is how so many of those engaged in the anti-military efforts have coalesced around key concepts of diversity and inclusion, of ethnic minorities, of women, of LGBTQI individuals as baselines for building the future of the country. Can you give us a summary of the major asks of those on the ground, both of domestic actors like the National Unity Government and CRPH, as well as of the international community?
Thank you for having me here. I'm thinking of all the fallen heroes of the country. So as Akila was already saying about the country, I'm speaking with a heavy heart right now because I receive a lot of information about my friends in hiding, also friends who got jailed, who got killed, also who got tortured in the detention center. So it's so painful at the same time that we are the 60% of the population, the young people who are under 35, and we are always at the front line whenever the country has serious situations, and we got killed, we got tortured, but at the same time we are worried about the future, like what the future is staying for us. We don't know, but we are all dedicated to fight against the military dictatorship with a clear consciousness, because what's happening in the country is nothing new. It's we have faced similar atrocity and even higher and bigger atrocity in the Rohingya through the Rohingya population back in 2017, and that happened just in front of our eyes. While we are alive, and we couldn't do anything. So as a young generation, purely we feel suffocated and we feel trapped at the same time, always tired because we are not in the position of power to decide or to stop these atrocities happening, even in the past 5 years when the Rohingya atrocity happened. Rohingya crisis happened. So as people say, Myanmar is at the brink of, on the brink of becoming a failed state. I think personally, Myanmar is already a failed state because our generation failed everything. Even the international community failed us. We are seeing repeated atrocity committed by the same institutions for the past 30 years, and we've been reporting with everything we can. Ethnic groups, even the Rohingya population, they've been trying their best. They've been shouting their head out, but at the same time, the military staged a coup in the first of February in 2021. So that's clearly feel, everything in the world just feel us. The justice mechanism is not playing hard enough to hold these perpetrators accountable, and they are still keep going away with a complete impunity. So, as you say, since the coup attempt, the military has brutally killed more than 800 people, including 73 children, arrested more than 5,000, and nearly 200 people, including myself, were issued a warrant list, on the national televisions. At the same time, there's an increased atrocity happening in the ethnic minorities areas, Karen, Garani, Chin, Shan, Kachin states, with nearly 1,600 attacks in the first 3 months of the coup alone. In Karen state, we have over 70,000 people being displaced due to the Honda airstrikes and mortar shelling. In Minda, in Chin state, the poorest state in the country, more than 10,000 people have fled to the jungles, and many of them are fleeing to the India border. At the same time, in Garani state, more than 50,000 people are now fleeing within 5 days of conflict, 5 days of the end struggle, when the military use the heavy weaponries to crash down the peaceful protests, as well as the young people who are defending their own communities. So just yesterday, I was informed two young Karenni men, they were killed right at the spot when they tried to destroy a tank. You know, that they are simply, I feel we are failing them. Like I myself as a youth advocate, I can't protect these young people, and they feel like nothing, nobody, no communities or no international body can protect them. And in the end, they have to protect themselves because they clearly see these military tanks coming into their villages, to their communities, can destroy their family houses. So they have to defend by themselves. So currently what's happening in the country is a defense conflict. Many people are picking up their guns and trying to defend themselves. But we need to be clearly aware that many peaceful protests are happening almost every day. Only when they have no chances of peaceful protest, they were so outrageous, and they joined the armed forces and trying to defend their own communities. So the coup in the country is been over nearly 4 months now, but the coup is still a failure in the country. Many people are still defiant and resisting with everything they have. They lose their job. They even given up their life with everything they have, and what they have is their own life, or they give up to defend and to define the military junta. So as myself, I see these atrocities are so horrific and brutal, but unsurprising. As I said, these atrocities have been reported repeatedly by different ethnic groups. What happened in Rohingya population 2016, 2017, we don't forget, and we will never forgive that. As a young generation, I'm sick of seeing these crimes are happening with a complete impunity. So the main acts from myself as a young generation, I can't speak on behalf of our leaders right now, but as a young generation, after speaking with different population and young people, young leaders, our main act is we want to demand for justice and accountability. So this is the main ask from us. We want our friends, our leaders, our national unity government, even international community to do their best, maximum effort to ensure to hold these perpetrators accountable, whatever it is, whatever it costs, we will do it. Like joining ICJ case, asking governments around the world to join the ICJ case, or to refer situation in Myanmar to ICC, or what is there? What is there? We want to see anything that could hold these perpetrators accountable. So that's the main act for me. And at the same time, while we are having political revolution, arms revolutions, we are also doing the most important priority task, which is ideological revolutions, because as young generation, we are aware of the past and present atrocity committed, and these atrocities are not just driven by a group of people or just institution, but also by the ideologies behind these institutions. So we are trying to defeat these ideologies, these ultra-nationalism, supremacist ideology, extremist ideology, racism, patriarchy. So we are trying our best as a young generations. So I think right now our country is showing to the world that we are not designed just to fit with one constitution or two constitutions. We are designed to share the power among ourselves. We are designed for a federal democratic union. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Really, it's been so incredible to see the way that youth activists have been leading with such moral clarity on issues such as ethnic diversity, really pushing not just, I think, the international community, but those within Myanmar themselves on these issues. And it's, I think, hopefully we'll see how this gets taken forward. So next we're going to move to Tun Kin. And so Tun Kin, today's discussion, the timing of it is related to the fact that in fact, we're looking at, Myanmar's report to the International Court of Justice was due this last Sunday. And so, I'm sorry, one second. So the report deadline was this past Sunday to submit its third compliance report on provisional measures. Baruch has continually and independently assessed compliance with these orders. Can you please talk about your latest report on the issue and in particular, how the coup has impacted compliance?
Thank you, Akila, for your wonderful question. The first point to make is that impunity for atrocity crimes has paved the way for the coup. The generals feel bold enough to stage a coup without any consequences. Our new report clearly shows that the genocide against our people is continuing. Myanmar has taken not even one single step to amend the laws and policies that underpin the genocide. Instead, the military presence has increased in Rakhine State, even though there is an easy ceasefire between Temedo and Arkan army. The conditions of life being imposed on our people in Rakhine State are unbearable. Since the beginning of the year, at least 15 Rohingya have died due to restrictions that prevent access to medical care. 9 of them were babies and young infants who died after an outbreak of diarrhea in the detention camps. They should never been born, in detention in the first place, and they should not have died from preventable disease. That Temedo makes routine demands for forced labor from Rohingya communities, and our people continue to face risks of arbitrary detention and extortion. At least one Rohingya man was tortured to death while in the custody of border guard police in northern Arkan State. Ending the Rohingya genocide and building a democratic Myanmar are closely linked, but involve, stopping the Temedoring of terror once and for all. International community must now more than ever take the genuine action to make this reality. The human cost of failure is too high. That is what I just want to highlight.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Chin Kin. And so over to Ambassador Rapp. Ambassador Rapp, you've engaged in international diplomacy and injustice efforts around a range of countries and groups and are very familiar with both the opportunities and the challenges. Considering the continued failure of the international community to go beyond statements and to take action on Myanmar, can you please outline what you see as the important things the international community, including individual countries, could do in this moment?
Okay, well, thank you, and it's great to join this group and to hear Thinzar's and Tung Kin's comments, because I'm fully in accord with them. What we see on February 1st and since is the legacy of impunity, and frankly, responsibility for that also lies with the international community and even with Western countries like our own, who at one time, at least before the partial opening and about 9 years ago, were pressing for commissions of inquiry and for accountability, but then allowed this idea that, better to sweep these things under the carpet and avoid accountability and the hope that things can stabilize and that we can move toward a democratic Myanmar. Without the kind of military control over the security sector that was total under the Constitution and the Constitution blocking and everything else. And it was a wrong-headed policy, caused the governments not to react in 2012 with the horrendous crimes in Sitwe, even in 2016 with the clearance operation. It was only in 2017 that the West began to speak more loudly, and even then, no real push on this idea of, well, one, the 1982 Constitution excluding Rohingya used to be in government, part of the process, part of Myanmar, even in imperfect days in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and now that changed, and no expansion beyond the 135 ethnic groups, and just entirely too easy on the justice issue, and it's natural. That the military gained the impression that they could get away with this. And it just shows how you cannot have peace, you cannot have transition without establishing the truth and without beginning accountability processes. And having gotten it wrong, now we have to work to get out of the situation and to work with all of the people. Obviously, we have the case in the ICJ, which other nations need to support. The United States and Britain could join together with already Gambia and the interventions by the Netherlands and Canada, which are yet to be fully manifest, but will be coming into that process once this jurisdictional issue is resolved. So, it's important to state that, of course, recognizing that it was Aung San Suu Kyi who disgracefully came and justified the genocide. And that means very clearly carrying the message that we don't agree with that, and that we see the future in Myanmar as an inclusive country, and that our engagement with the national unity government needs to be obviously very supportive, because people are suffering on all sides. But we need to clearly lay down the rule that what comes out of this, as the younger generation speaking this morning expressed, is something in which is more inclusive, including the Rohingya within the Myanmar nation, and envisioning a future in which everyone's working together. Whether that could somehow involve the NUG actually joining on the other side or attempting to at the ICJ, I don't know. Arsalan can speak to that, but I think it's important that be our messaging. That now it's accountability, not just for the horrors, and they are immense. And I just, particularly my friends in Berkeley, with whom I work closely, came out with a report yesterday. It was just so horrendously shocking. I mean, we see people being shot down in the streets and children killed, and the horrors of all of that, and the mass detentions and the deaths in detention, and the threats against anyone who speaks out and who stands out. But actually a strategy of state-sponsored terror, where people are being killed randomly, where bodies are being dug up and taken away and cremated, and all with an object of absolutely devastating the community's hope and expectations for any kind of humane or proper approach. I mean, this is like Al Qaeda or ISIS. We've got to call it as really state-sponsored terror. We've got to react to this in the serious way that it's that in every tool that we have. We have to recognize, of course, that the UN Security Council is blocked. China is clearly going to veto anything. Looking at the record of what the UN Security Council has blocked, a few statements that are watered down to almost nothing. Even after the clearance operation in 2017, the statement in November of 2017 was disgraceful, and what we see now is not much better. And of course, ASEAN is incapable of, whole idea is not to name and shame other countries for peril of being judged by the international standards that people have been subscribing to and they've all ratified. So we're not going to get it there. But the responses that we can exercise involve a community of states, friends of the people of Myanmar, the people of Burma, that we work and support their efforts. That includes the documentation of the crimes, so important in the ICJ when it gets back to the merits of this case after the jurisdictional issues are resolved. So important in the ICC on the forced deportation, understanding that's only a narrow part of it. And not all of the crimes that have been committed in all of the country, but very important to have that documentation. And the documentation that I've seen civil society groups bringing out, it's been incredible. I mean, really has been much greater and stronger than I've seen in a long time, and on including documents from 14, 15, 16 on the genocidal intent that are now available. That kind of work needs to be supported. And while we have IIMs and commissions from Geneva, and we need a new commission on the crimes and on the violations, by the way, I mean, we've got a rapporteur, but he doesn't have the resources. We have an IIMM led by my friend Nick Kumjian that's gathering the documents, but isn't putting out public statements. We do need a new mandate to dig in to the violations and make a public report. in regard to what's happened since February 1st, understanding it in all of this context. We need that, but all of those things need the work of civil society. They don't have access. They can't bring things out. They can't communicate. They can't go there because the United Nations won't allow it. So you've got to have that kind of partnership. That's essential. Obviously, we have to look at our sanctions. That includes, I saw the good news yesterday that Total, the French oil company, is refusing to engage with the Myanmar oil and gas enterprise and to make payments in that direction. Other oil companies, including Chevron, need to join in that same determination. And if they don't, we need sanctions in that regard. And this is really the lifeblood of this regime. And if we're going to be serious, instead of sanctioning people or travel banning people that are never traveling anyway, we have to take that further step. And then finally, I think we have to look at what the regime is doing. I mean, crimes against humanity, certainly. War crimes, to the extent they're engaged in an armed conflict, yes. Genocide, yes. The evidence I have seen is there, and that will, I hope, in due course, be recognized at the ICJ. But it's also state-sponsored terrorism. That's what we're engaged in here, and the same kind of tools that we've used against non-state actors that have terrorized the civilian communities for their own control and political ends need to be used here as well.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Rapp. And really, I think, for highlighting the need not just to talk about justice and accountability for the moment, but also for the past and how important that reckoning is. On that, one of, this whole conversation is centering really around the importance that everyone places on justice and accountability. And Arsalan, you're the counsel for the Gambia, and one of the few processes that continues to go on through this coup that is really seeking to achieve justice and accountability, particularly for what happened to the Rohingya. And so can you give us an update on the case, including if at all the case has been affected by the coup?
Yes, thank you, Akila. Thanks for your kind introduction, and thanks to Brooke for hosting this event, and to all the co-panelists for your really excellent commentary and remarks. And so as everyone knows, the Gambia's case against Myanmar is part of the efforts to hold the state of Myanmar and the military in particular accountable for the crimes they've committed. Because that case is brought solely under the Genocide Convention, it only focuses on the crimes committed against the Rohingya, the genocidal crimes committed against the Rohingya, particularly during the clearance operation. So it doesn't capture all of the other crimes, many of which have been mentioned, against other ethnic minority groups in the country, as well as the crimes that the military has committed since its coup and the targeting of peaceful protesters and the over 800 or so people who have been killed by this regime. And we certainly our thoughts go with them and to everyone who's fighting on the street and resisting this. And so definitely wanted to make sure to mention that. The case, as Ambassador Rapp mentioned, there is a new phase of the case which began on January 20th of this year, when Myanmar filed what are called preliminary objections. So these are essentially objections to the court's jurisdiction. So just to rewind a little bit further, after the case was filed, the Gambia had asked for provisional measures, essentially emergency measures by the court in order to prevent further harm being committed against the Rohingya. And the court unanimously ordered those provisional measures against Myanmar, ordering Myanmar not to commit further acts of genocide, to prevent genocide affirmatively, to preserve the evidence of genocide, and to report to the court on its implementation of those measures. And since then, the Gambia worked very hard on producing a very substantive and comprehensive memorial, which sets out the full case as to how genocide occurred during the clearance operations and why the state is responsible for that genocide. And that was filed in October of 2020. And that started the timeline, the time limit for Myanmar to submit its response, its counter memorial, which it has a total of 9 months to do. But that 9 months has that sort of clock for those 9 months has been paused because on January 20th of this year, Myanmar filed preliminary objections. These are jurisdictional objections. These are essentially arguments that Myanmar said is making that question whether the court has jurisdiction to hear this case and whether the Gambia has standing to bring these claims. These are essentially the same objections that were made during the provisional measures hearing itself and that the court had unanimously rejected. But at provisional measures, the court looks at those questions on a prima facie basis. So it doesn't do a full analysis of those issues. Now that Myanmar has raised it via these preliminary objections, the court will have to do a complete analysis and judgment on that. And we anticipate that in the same way that the court unanimously rejected them at provisional measures, we're very confident that they will do so again here. And once the court does so, we can get back to the merits phase. But just getting back to the timeline. So on January 20th, Myanmar filed the preliminary objections. Only 10, 11 days later, the coup happened. The Gambia had until May 20th to file its response. The Gambia actually filed its response early. We filed on April 20th, the Gambia's responsive brief on the preliminary objections. And so we're now waiting for the court to either indicate that it's going to make a decision on the papers alone, or for the court to indicate a hearing date, a date on which a hearing would be held to hear those preliminary objections. That's one track. And again, once the court finally does issue a ruling on that, then the timeline for the counter memorial restarts, and Myanmar would have about 6 more months to file that counter memorial. Now, you mentioned, Akila, the implementation reports and how that was due on the 23rd of May, the third implementation report. That is correct. Up to now, Myanmar had been submitting its implementation reports on time. The Gambia has usually received those implementation reports when they have been filed. We have not received one at the moment. And I guess we're not exactly sure precisely the reason why, whether a report wasn't filed or whether more than one entity has filed a report. And so the court might be trying to figure out what to do about that. But as of now, I can just say that we haven't received a report to respond to, and the Gambia has the right under the court's order on provisional measures to respond to any implementation report by Myanmar. And as soon as we are provided with any such report, whether it's coming from the junta or the NUG or both, the Gambia would certainly provide its response. Now, your question was relating to how the coup may or may not affect the case. And I think the situation right now with the open question about the implementation report, whether one was filed, by whom it was filed, it goes to that very issue. It shows that there is some effect of the coup on the case, because I think the court is being very careful as to how they treat this issue. And I think they're analyzing the situation, and we'll see what the court ultimately decides, but I think they're not rushing into something that they may feel would prejudice either party. And so we'll wait and see what the court does. But I think it goes to the broader issue that was raised by some of the comments regarding recognition. Who currently is speaking for the state of Myanmar? Is it the junta? Is it the national unity government? I think those are open questions for a lot of states. And we've seen, various episodes or incidents where the various actors who are going to have a role on this are sort of testing the waters. There was a hearing in the US Congress where some representatives of the national unity government were speaking to members of Congress, and they got very pointed questions about what is the position of the national unity government on the Rohingya genocide. And those members of Congress found the answers presented by those NUG representatives to be lacking, because they weren't responsive to the civilian government's previous non-recognition policy. As Ambassador Rapp mentioned, it was Aung San Suu Kyi herself who came to the court to represent the state of Myanmar and to defend against the charges of genocide. And the members of Congress were really pushing the NUG representatives as to what their actual position is on this, and how their previous position was untenable and completely unacceptable. And there may be a process at the UN in New York with a credentials committee regarding which representative or who would be representing the state of Myanmar going forward, because the current ambassador there has aligned himself with the NUG, and the junta has tried to replace him. So all that's to say is that I think the broader question of international recognition also plays a role in terms of how the ICJ case is proceeding. And if the NUG does seek to speak for the state, if the NUG's goal is in fact to be the recognized representative of the state of Myanmar, then I think it does make sense for them to be attempting to participate in the case, however they may be doing so, because the ICJ case, again, is a case that involves the state of Myanmar. So whichever entity is seeking to represent that state, they should be making those efforts to do so.
Great. Thank you so much for that update, Arslan. I saw just this morning that the World Health Assembly decided that Myanmar wouldn't be represented at the World Health Assembly because both the NUG and the junta had submitted credentials, and they said that they're going to wait for the UN General Assembly. So I think we're going to see a lot of this type of grappling by UN bodies and other actors. And I'm happy to kind of continue this conversation perhaps in moderated discussion. But picking up on your point, I think the important point about the role that the NUG has in perhaps taking a different approach to justice and accountability than the previous NLD-led government did. I want to move to Aaron here, because Aaron, you worked with Burke to produce a report on different efforts that can be made around justice and accountability, both by the NUG and the international community, to ensure that this is something that's central in the response to the coup. So Aaron, can you tell us a little bit about what approaches that you see moving forward?
Yeah, thank you very much, Akila. And let me just say up front, it's really a pleasure and honor to be here with all of you, my fellow panelists, many of whom I've had the pleasure of hearing and participating in conversations with. And much of what I'm going to say has been touched on and articulated already in an incredibly powerful way. So I'm going to be referencing my panelists, my fellow panelists. But to pick up, I would say, on something that Tun Kin said to begin with, is the interlinkage between democracy and justice. And this also goes to, I think, what Shunlei was indicating about the frustration of young people. We have heard the rhetoric of, free and fair elections in 2020, and that this is what needs to be recognized, and we need to, and that the coup has essentially interrupted the democratic path. What Tun Kin as president and BRO UK has said on that point is quite clear, that the status quo is not acceptable, either for democracy or for justice. And one of the things that I think is important to emphasize is that many of the human rights violations, and which are directly relevant to what would be systemic aspects of the genocide, are actually directly related to the democratic process in Myanmar. So we need to always bear in mind, for example, that exclusion from the democratic process is a fundamentally non-democratic aspect of Myanmar, and it is also a justice issue, right? So these things go together. And as has been said by Arslan and a number of other commentators, including Ambassador Rapp, the previous government, not just the Tatmadaw, but the previous government operated in a non-democratic manner in relation to its own citizens. Now, the relationship between justice and democracy, I would also say in terms of what the NUG needs to do, is to start on a different path, both in terms of democracy and justice. And the very first point on that is actually to come back to what Shunli said about feeling sort of unable to affect change within her own country. This is a very important part, right? And this is one of our first recommendations to the NUG, is to engage very seriously in a domestic reform of laws. For example, repealing the Article 445 of the Constitution, which provides immunity for crimes. Right now, Myanmar doesn't have laws criminalizing international crimes for them to be able to be prosecuted domestically. And one of the aspects of being a legitimate government and a democratic government is that you not only protect your own citizens from violations, but also that it is the obligation of the state, first and foremost, well before international institutions, to act, to hold accountable when government actors, their own actors, have potentially committed crimes or harmed their own citizens. And this is incredibly important as a foundational point that Myanmar, or the NUG, I would say, the first thing that they need to be very serious about is publicly clarifying domestic reforms to ensure moving forward that the Burmese people can use their own court systems to seek justice and accountability. Now, obviously, that's a more far off thing. That is not something that can happen immediately. And so the other part of the briefing that was put out called Paths to Justice are about the different approaches that the NUG really needs to take from the previous government in terms of ongoing international justice efforts. As Arsalan has mentioned, the previous government at the ICJ defended the actions of the Tatmadaw, and in some ways was complicit in terms of the laws that underlie the persecution of the Rohingya people. In the report, one of the recommendations, as Arsalan mentioned, in terms of being recognized as legitimate, is that the NUG should file a report, and they should do so publicly as opposed to confidentially, and be on the record as to what they intend to do to comply with the provisional measures as the legitimate government, if that is what they claim to be. We've also addressed, in terms of a different approach to the International Criminal Court, the IIMM, as well as the universal jurisdiction cases. In all of these, and I know we have some questions, and so I want to be brief, but in all of these, the main point, it's sort of just a philosophical point, right? Is that previously, whatever effort we were talking about, we had opposition and non-cooperation with the investigative bodies, whether that's the IIMM, the International Criminal Court, or in terms of universal jurisdiction. Sorry, and that is the fundamental change that needs to happen. The NUG needs to publicly make clear that it will cooperate with investigators, that it will, for example, provide access to evidence and witnesses as requested, that it will ensure the safety of anyone who is cooperating or working with these international mechanisms. And I think that is sort of on a high level. The report is available on BRR UK's website, as well as on other social media, and there's much more detail for each of those mechanisms. And if there are questions specifically about the NUG and how they could or could not interact, I'm happy to answer those. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Erin. And I think certainly based on the questions that have already been submitted, we'll certainly be talking maybe in a bit more detail about some of those. But kind of thinking about the idea that that I think that we're circling around here is that the NUG is seeking legitimacy. They're seeking to establish themselves, both internationally and domestically, as the actors who can lead this new Myanmar forward. And so this question is really for Tun Kin and Shunlei, but others feel free to come in. So, you know, on issues like the Rohingya, on issues like justice, the NUG hasn't come to where I think a lot of people would like to see them be. So can you discuss a little bit the, you know, the status of the gaps between these expectations and where they stand, and why it's important that they actually, you know, move forward on these issues? Maybe Tun Kin, do you want to start? And then Shunlei, we can go over to you.
Yes, thank you, Akila. This is very important question. We all Rohingyas are really want to see the policy, public policy from national unity government. I mean, like, Rohingya people are solidarity with the people of Burma in this moment, you know, where we are looking at new Burma inclusion, you know, and since the 1st February, you know, the coup, Rohingya people are, you know, in General Strike Committee and other parts of this revolution. Rohingya people are participating, and internationally, Rohingya people are also, Rohingya activists are you know, highlighting how military committing the crimes. But one thing here, regarding on NUG, we really want to see their public policy. You know, before 2010, like when Rohingya were participated with NCGUB, you know, previous coalition, exile government, and other NLD members, you know, in UK and other countries, they were told that, oh, we are fighting common enemy. When military go away, you know, we Rohingya will get their rights. And we have seen that after 2015, the worst situation of Rohingya have, you know, witnessed the worst situation ever. And more than 1 million Rohingya expelled. And, you know, that is, to be honest, that is NLD, the government defended the crimes committed by military. So that is serious concern. 1 million people Rohingya in Bangladesh, and 600,000 Rohingyas who are facing genocide now in our kind of state. We want to see clearly from national unity government publicly clear policy. First, they should restore the Rohingya as a, you know, as a ethnic people of Burma, like Tanyinta in Burmese, they call, we've been already recognized as an ethnic group. And secondly, full citizenship. And we call it in Burma, we are like a full citizen, you know, bona fide citizen of Burma, not like citizen according to the law. Thirdly, they have to recognize that genocide has taken place. And fourth, they have to accept that UN fact-finding mission report. That is, they have to accept it, because UN mandated fact-finding mission report already mentioned what's happened to the Rohingyas, and they investigated more than a year. And that's mentioned what's happened to the Rohingyas genocide. And lastly, 1 million Rohingyas are in Bangladesh. They should repatriate it back, and they have to restore them full citizenship, and also, you know, returning them to their original village and with compensation. Those points need to be met. Those points need to be highlighted from their policies. That's what we Rohingya want. We are not asking from NUG, you know, grant us new citizenship or anything. We are appealing, we are requesting, give us back our rights. And we are solidarity with the people of Burma. We are solidarity with, you know, whoever fighting Burmese military, with you together. But you need to show your solidarity with us by recognizing past crime and all the rights what they have been taken away. Because 1982 citizenship law, they have to abolish. That law cannot, that law is, you know, that law is just introduced by the military. Why NUG, if we fighting, you know, with this military, why NUG should accept that law? That law, the general they will introduce that law. That law is the main fundamental. That law deprive all the fundamental rights of the Rohingya. And one thing here, I want to highlight that some people are saying that they are still struggling, but NUG, they abolished 2008 constitution, which is the foundation of the country. Why not 82 law, and why not restore the Rohingya rights? Why there is a reason, why there is some obstacle? I can't believe it. So we together with the people of Burma to fight common enemy, and we are showing solidarity, and we want to see new Burma, and same time NUG. We would like to see that Rohingya people want to see the public policy from national unity government. That is very important for the inclusion and also international image for the NUG. We would like to see NUG, internationally recognized, but NUG should have also international standard. When they talk about human rights and others, they cannot simply, the world can assume that the world may assume, if they don't recognize genocide has taken place, and on that part, maybe military and NUG might be the same if they do recognize genocide has taken place against the Rohingya genocide. That is very serious issue, to be honest, because we want to see NUG is leading our country, and NUG should be included, everyone. That's my point. Thank you.
Thanks, Tin Ken. Shinlei, do you want to add anything here?
Yes. So the main reason why we organize We Are Rohingya campaign, which is not a new campaign, but we want to, as myself, as a young Burmese Buddhist, living in the country, I try to restart that campaign called We Are Rohingya, basically to ensure that we stand in solidarity with the Rohingya. But unfortunately, the campaign is mainly joined by the young people, the young generation, and the young generation is so easy. They realize the situation. They got waken up. That's how I felt. They got waken up to the situation, and they immediately felt what was wrong in the very beginning, and they apologized to the Rohingya population, not just to the Rohingya population, but also to different ethnic minorities and religious minorities. So I guess we have that kind of campaign, and it's going like we got more support than before. That's how I felt. But at the same time, our government itself, the NUG, having some issues in recognizing publicly, making a clear and strong policy to ensure everywhere and everyone in the country, including the Rohingya population who had to flee to the Bangladesh, have their own rights. So I felt there are some issue. That one of the issue is because they have some people who are accomplices to the genocide on board in their own cabinet, and that's becoming a main barriers for the NUG to go forward. And they have a problem. They don't know the culture of apologizing when they make some mistake. They need to apologize, and the young people are pushing them to apologize for the past mistake. Before they apologize, they need to recognize what they have done is wrong. I think we are not yet there. One person from the whole cabinet, she had made that kind of confession. She herself as a Karen ethnic, so she clearly understands. She can resonate what happened to the Rohingya and her own ethnicity. But the others, I don't think they are regretful of what they have done in the past, and they keep going on. And that's how Kofi Annan report, for example, they mention it again and again, because they stay dwell with the past. They're not yet in the revolution. We want our NUG government to be a revolutionary, a new government with a fresh blood, with a new thinking. But basically, our young people, even though we are the revolutionary on the front line, but we're not in the cabinet, so we can't afford to change that. And we're now pushing them to do what they have to do. And within 3 months, many things have changed. Some people are now basically saying Rohingya, and it happens so quick. I think we all don't lose heart, and we have to push them. I don't want them to recognize Rohingya or to favor or to make the policy just because they want international recognition. I want them to make clear policy just because they understand and they believe in, the equal rights for everyone. So that's what I think. And they are lacking of political will right now, and yeah, we need to push that.
Thank you so much, Shinlei. And I think, what both you and Tunkin are highlighting is really the need for there to be some fundamental baselines of engagement with the NUG, both by the international community and with those on the ground. We've seen the consequence of the past mistake of the international community choosing to ignore the problems with the NLD, the problems with the 2008 Constitution, and grant complete legitimacy. And so I think in order to not avoid that cycle from repeating in this context, what you two are talking about really needs to be an important guidance point, so that it's not just a matter of blindly giving legitimacy to the NUG because they are frankly better than the military, but it doesn't mean that they are they're at a position where they have the support of the entirety of the country. And so there are so many questions in the chat. So I'm going to go to Arsalan and Ambassador Rapp next on some of these. And Arsalan, I know you may be limited in what you're able to say in your position as actual legal counsel, so ignore whatever you don't want to. But, a lot of people are asking questions about what is the impact if the NUG does, in fact, seek to engage with the ICJ case? Is there something that's distinct? What is the impact if the NUG seeks to in some way, acknowledge genocide and say that that they're in agreement with the Gambia and what happened, and what are the consequences of some of those? And I think some of these questions are on state recognition as well. And maybe Ambassador Rapp, you might want to start there, and then we can maybe pick up on any threads that are specific to the ICJ case as well.
Sure, Akila. I guess I'll start. And I can't, I just, given the fact that we are, we are in active litigation, I can't be too specific on that. But I will just say that the court will have to decide at some point which entity it's recognizing as speaking for the state. And based on what's happened so far, it seems like the NUG may have made an attempt to communicate with the court or provide information to the court or represent Myanmar in some way with the court. And so I think that issue is active, and the court will have to assess various factors in terms of how it deals with these situations, in terms of how it can properly administer the case such that the case continues and doesn't get delayed even while this issue is still live, because the Gambia has rights. The Gambia is the applicant state in this situation. It has rights to have its case heard. And the court has acknowledged in its provisional measures order that we are talking about a situation of genocide, allegations of genocide. And the court in its provisional measures order found that there is risk of irreparable harm to the Rohingya community in Myanmar because the active risk of genocide is still present, and all of the risk factors that had been identified and recognized by the UN fact-finding mission are still there, and in some cases have become even worse, given the fact that COVID-19 has created a unique health threat to the Rohingya who are trapped in internment camps and do not have the freedom of movement, as well as the coup, which I think has also exacerbated the vulnerability of the Rohingya to violence at the hands of the Tatmadaw. So it's our hope that the court will ensure that the case continues to move forward. And I think the court will have to look at this issue closely and decide based on various factors. And I think the UN processes that you mentioned in terms of what the World Health Assembly did and what's happening in New York will be very important to the ultimate resolution of this question.
Thanks, Arsalan. Do you want to add anything, Ambassador Rapp?
Let me just add, I mean, in terms of international recognition, it's certainly very important that the permanent representative who's in New York remain there at the UN, and that efforts to replace him by this coup d'etat that's operated completely unconstitutionally to overthrow the established government, not be recognized, and that the supporters of democracy, the supporters of human rights in Myanmar around the world, take a firm position on that. And I think seeing how strong the General Assembly was when it came to questions like the funding and the support of the IIMM, votes of 145 to 12 and that kind of thing. And that was, of course, against the Aung San Suu Kyi government, I think indicates that in the General Assembly, there should be the votes and the support to prevent any displacement. I was extremely disappointed earlier this year when the representative of the junta was allowed to speak at the UN Human Rights Council. And that shouldn't have taken place. I wish the United States hadn't withdrawn from the Human Rights Council as we did. I hope the US is reelected to it in this November, December, and that there's somebody there that can object and raise the credentials issue if there is that effort for a representative like that to speak. I mean, I sometimes think in these sort of in these situations where peace is everything and accountability and justice is nothing, it's well, let's get the bad guy in the room and then we can negotiate with him and then we can discuss. And in fact, all you do is enable the bad guy, and you recognize him and you ignore his sins, and you actually make bad acts sort of a qualification for getting into the room. And so this is one of the ways in which sometimes the efforts to establish some kind of phony peace actually work against the prevention of atrocities. We saw that rather clearly in the Balkans, where crimes were continued and ignored and pushed under the rug for several years for fear of losing access to the mass murderers who are leading these forces. And so I think that's something we have to keep clearly in our mind. Now, obviously, we've got this challenging issue in terms of the NUG and where many of these office holders were and how they defended the genocidal government and how we deal with that. But obviously, better that government than this one. I do think that there's an opportunity for the NUG to show itself in a positive light by filings in the ICJ. Now, I want to listen to Arsalan and others in terms of the procedure, because the most important thing in that is that we actually did have an appearance and participation by the state of Myanmar. This is not a defaulted case. I mean, this jurisdictional issue which they raised on provisional measures, I presume they're going to lose it again. And so there will be an order at the end of the day by this case, and Myanmar can't say, oh, well, we're not in it. It was just like China tried to do with a 9-dash line in the Permanent Court of Arbitration, or we're not part of that. They really are. And so it is important not to disturb that or create a situation where it becomes ambiguous. But clearly the NUG, if it's the government, should be filing reports, and they might file something useful as opposed to just saying, oh, we're here. But by the way, what did we do? I mean, this period included at least 11 or 12 days of our control, during this time period. And what was the Tatmadaw dealing with? And what kind of ethnic language was used? What kind of xenophobic papers went around? What kind of this? What kind of that? Continued to occur during the course of the last 4 months. And from inside, tell us something about that, because I would hope that they would have been concerned about the military's use of social media, and et cetera. Now, and to be frank, I think the military, it said it won the election, that it was fraudulent, et cetera. I think the military was surprised. I think they thought that their sort of divide and conquer strategy and their sort of line up with against Muslims, against the Rohingya, was something that was going to gain them votes. And thankfully it didn't. But I think that what they were doing at all times in terms of exacerbating this division needs to be exposed. And one of the useful things the NUG would be to say from those that were inside it, this is what they were doing. Maybe we didn't approve of it. And maybe we should have said more about it, but this is what they were doing, and they'd help the case if they made those kind of submissions. And it'd be more than just an effort to gain political legitimacy, which is, questionable because of their failure to recognize the undemocratic nature and and the illegitimate from a sovereignty nature of their previous government and constitution.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Rapp. And, I think really for highlighting the importance of making sure that these actions that are being taken by the NUG aren't just ones that are being done to gain international legitimacy at a surface level, but represent kind of a true and meaningful shift and change for how they plan to lead the country. There's been some questions in the chat around both universal jurisdiction and the ICC. And so I'm going to turn to Aaron and again, Ambassador Rapp, perhaps back to you on this. So Aaron, maybe if you want to start. Some people have asked the question around the ratification of the Rome Statute by the NUG and what the options are there. We've seen that, in places like Palestine, there's been some opportunities to do so. And maybe just out of my own personal interest, if you could also comment on the ability of the NUG to sign other human rights treaties as well, because I think that they are linked together. And then why don't we start there and then we'll go to the questions on universal jurisdiction.
Okay, sure. And that's an excellent question. So this is going to be slightly repetitive, but a bit different. But to pick up on the point that both Arsalan and Ambassador Rapp made, the technical process, what would happen in terms of ratification of the Rome Statute, because again, Myanmar is not a state party, is that they would deposit that with the Secretary General of the United Nations. And we would be right again at this question of, would the Secretary General accept that from the NUG? Is the NUG actually able, on behalf, again, the state of Myanmar, because just as with the ICJ, the ICC deals with states, not governments. So the main point here is that the ICC, very similar to the ICJ, does not have the sort of competence, nor is it within its authority to unilaterally decide the legitimacy of who legitimately recognizes or represents a state as a government, and who can bind that state with international obligations. They would, as you mentioned with Palestine, I think that's a very good example to just explain how this worked in a different context, but it's very similar. Palestine originally, in I believe 2012, attempted to file what's called a 12-3 declaration with the International Criminal Court. And at the time, because Palestine did not have any recognized status with the United Nations, the prosecutor's office was unable to accept that filing, and basically said it is for the United Nations General Assembly to determine whether an entity can serve for purposes of a state in binding that state to the Rome Statute. Now, subsequently, the United Nations, as I think most people are aware, granted what's called heightened observer status to Palestine, which is not a state designation, but is a form of designation that allowed Palestine to join not only the Rome Statute, but also UNESCO, for example, and several other UN bodies. And so that is why Palestine is a member state of the International Criminal Court. But it is not the International Criminal Court that decided at some point that Palestine had that character. They waited. And so that is what will happen, basically. However, what does that mean for the NUG? What they can do, on the assumption that they will be recognized and that they are the legitimate government, is to pledge publicly to ratify the Rome Statute once they are recognized as the government of the legitimate government of Myanmar. There's nothing preventing the NUG from doing that. So I do want people to understand, though, that there, as has been said by other people, there is the question of legitimacy needs to be resolved, and it is not something that the NUG can do itself. And from international institutions, it's going to be met probably with hesitation and reference back to the UN General Assembly.
Thanks, Aaron. Ambassador Rapp, do you want to add anything here?
Well, I really appreciate Aaron's point there. And I just want to be clear. I mean, it does sound to some extent like a great thing at the NUG tomorrow made a 12-3 declaration and say we put Myanmar before the court from such and such a date, or we're going to ratify it. We're going to meet in exile somewhere and get on a Zoom call and have a vote and send it in. I mean, I won't, from a political policy and sort of moving the situation forward, there may be arguments for that. I think from an international legitimacy point of view, I mean, obviously the Palestine case has been debated a lot in terms of the jurisdiction, and even the decision of the ICC pretrial chamber was mixed on the issue. It is, however, different in the sense that was Palestine a state or not a state, and the fact that it was that there was this non-member state resolution in the General Assembly is the basis upon which the Secretariat accepted the ratification by the PA. Now, of course, the PA in Ramallah is not the Hamas in Gaza, etc. But clearly the UN had recognized the PA as the authority for that state, and there wasn't anybody else coming forward saying we're the state. And here you have a situation of potentially two groups, this junta and that controls a lot of the territory, not all of it, and the NUG and exactly what territory it controls can be quite an argument. The ICC has been reluctant to get into questions of choosing which government. For instance, when the government of the Muslim Brotherhood government was overthrown by Sisi in Egypt, it's formerly the nationally elected president, who was then in detention and who since has died, tried to get the case before the ICC, and the ICC wouldn't touch it under those circumstances. And the General Assembly is reluctant to get into a question of choosing between which group and which country controls. It's much more comfortable with keeping the credentials of who's ever there. And in the past, they illegitimately allowed the credentials of the Khmer Rouge to represent Cambodia for an extra 12 years after it was overthrown in Phnom Penh. So these things do happen when you have an excellent government. But I think here we're in a situation where it probably wouldn't be sorted, and we wouldn't have ICC jurisdiction based upon NUG and where it is now. But clearly what Aaron said about them pledging as soon as they're back in Yangon and Naypyidaw to do this, I think would be a very important thing for them to say, and would earn them enormous amount of support, and would open up the door to accountability and get around to some extent something else that they need to get around, which this is the Section 445 of the current Constitution that immunizes folks, because obviously they can't be in complementarity. They can't do anything and they can't do anything about people being shot down in the street today by the military, or the terror of going into neighborhoods and just shooting children in order to terrorize. They can't do anything about that unless they do something about the Constitution. So I think those are important demands that need to be on them, and that really ought to be acceptable. You know, the question of universal jurisdiction is an interesting one. I salute to Ken's filing in Argentina. The Argentine authorities have, as I understand it, and he can speak to that, have of course been quite interested in what's happening in the ICC, because they take the view, as many states do, particularly when they're distant from the scene of the crime, that if another court is getting involved, they'll step back. And clearly they're interested in what the ICC is doing, but clearly the ICC is only interested in this forced deportation into Bangladesh, not even all of the crimes such as genocide committed against the Rohingya, particularly in 2017. So you know, that issue needs to be resolved. I mean, universal jurisdiction has gained much more strength because of what's happened in Syria, cases in Germany, indictments of high-level individuals in France, other cases that are being pursued in Europe. There is always concern about states that have no real interest and doing it entirely without a basis. But clearly in a situation where there is no other alternative and no other way to do it, I think we really have to look to universal jurisdiction and to courts proceeding with these cases, not on a political basis, but on a using all of the mechanisms of due process to achieve justice. Of course, an arrest warrant in Argentina against the main general or anybody else may be very, very hard to enforce, and it may be hard for them to investigate. But it is better than nothing, and it is increasingly recognized as the go-to place, particularly where there's no ICC jurisdiction directly of the crimes, and where the Security Council is blocked by a China or Russia veto.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
just want to add
Yes.
just
Go ahead, Tin Ken.
a few lines. Thank you, Ambassador Up, you already mentioned, and Argentina UJ case where Burmese Rohingya organization, we filed that in November 2019, and it's taking a bit longer because of COVID-19. And as far as what we learned, that requirements to open investigation are almost met. Like I believe that we can hear positive news in a few weeks' time. And one thing that ICC they contacted, and the ICC made already clear that this is nothing overlap. This case is just different from that is deportation case, and so UJ case in Argentina is different from that. And also ICJ, International Court of Justice, they also trying to check in whether it's overlapping. So I believe that is on the way now to from ICJ replying to Buenos Aires. So we are seeking simple that concrete action against impunity. That is what we are seeking. So I believe that we can we can identify the perpetrators as soon as we open investigation, and we can, after we identify the perpetrators, we will request red notice to the Interpol. That is the line we are looking at. So I definitely believe that we can send the red notice to the Interpol. I believe that all the protests, all the Rohingyas and other minorities in Burma, protesters who were killed, and for all the people of Burma, we believe that we can move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that update, Tin Ken, and for letting us know that there's more hope on the horizon, perhaps, for justice and accountability. I think it's, as we look at the current scenario, it's really great to hear. And I think also, your point is, it's an important one. So much of what's happened with the Rohingya is one where they have been marginalized. And here what we see are things like the ICJ, which are focused on the Rohingya. This universal jurisdiction case actually creates the hope for justice and accountability and openings for the entire country, for all of the ethnic groups. And I think that the leadership of the Rohingya here is something that's really important to be recognized. And so thank you for all that you do, and for all of that work. And I know Aaron wants to come back in here just to add a little bit more on the context of this conversation that we're talking about.
Thank you, Akila. And actually, it's very much to your point that you just made. I wanted to bring us back to, in particular, the words that Chun-Li said about how painful this moment is, and what she is seeing in terms of not specific and isolated to the Rohingya, but the violence and crimes being committed in the post-coup context against all the people of Burma across ethnic groups. And Tin Ken and BRO UK, in the briefing of Paths to Justice, this was one of the very important points. In fact, it begins by saying, as Tin Ken has said, that the Rohingya and BRO UK stand in solidarity with the calls for justice and accountability for the post-coup violence. And one of the things I just wanted to say is that in terms of the International Criminal Court and why the new should make a pledge, if it's not able to actually intervene at the International Criminal Court, to ratify the Rome Statute, is because that is the only way that there can also be justice, potentially, for crimes committed post-coup. Because otherwise we would have this same problem where only potentially deportation, only those aspects of the post-coup violence that occurred on a state party's territory would be investigatable, and that doesn't exist. So I just wanted to highlight the point that when the NUG is thinking about interacting with any of these mechanisms, whether it's universal jurisdiction, whether it's the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice is different. That really does not have really an avenue. But the other ones, including the IIMM, it is not just the Rohingya, it is inclusive justice also for all of the victims who have suffered and are suffering now, right now, as they try to fight the Tapara.
Thank you for that important addition, Erin. And we're really almost out of time here. So what I want to do is, you know, as we've seen, the voices from the country, the voices of the communities are the most important. And speaking directly to those communities is incredibly important. So I want to give Shunli 1 minute here if there's anything else that she wants to conclude with. And then we're going to turn it over to Tunkin, who's actually going to be addressing the Rohingya community in Rohingya about the scenario as well. So Shunli, first to you, and then Tunkin will go to you to close.
Thank you for having me. That's my last remark, and I learned a lot from each of you. That's really important. I think we need to have like Burmese version of discussion, especially with the young people, to discuss about justice and accountability. You know, how we want to like foresee how we want to see our future with justice and accountability. So I learned a lot from you. So that's my last remark. Thank you.
Thank you, Shunli, and thank you so much for all of the incredible work that you're doing there on the ground in such incredibly dangerous circumstances. Tunkin, over to you to really conclude and speak both to the audience here and to the community more broadly.
I would like to pass a message to the Rohingya genocide survivors in the camps who are watching. And this is about justice and accountability, where these people are waiting for so long. We cannot forget that. These are the people, when we visited to the camps, we want justice. So I would like to speak the Rohingya language. Assalamu alaikum arabai and buinain onara zantara bam Burma deshabutura aso solak. Ar onara zantara kemot aso arabai and buinain honorare Assalamu alaikum. So ajara ko eredi ki musharat bashide ajara ko mor babota kan insafar baboti justice onara begune zattomba ara kemot ashilam huyo de onara kan insaf begune onara insaf zatto sor ara begune insaf side barkula ase diniyo deshabutra ase diniyo kemot ase diniyo to ohon ara khokan case ase akan diki international criminal court ICC mother arkan ICJ mother arkan universal jurisdiction case Argentina mazi. Toi ohon Arab kumar jendila guri zulum gujidi yanamada ara hamaka insaf saidi yan begulun yanamada ara tofia asidi shafe yanamada Rohingya beguna hamgore ajadi ki ICJ maze report goa Burma tu tulafutto 24 tarikot 23 tarikot goto roibare toi balla ara brok Burmese Rohingya organization yukito akan report diki nialai Hoddur purjonto genocide ফলে দিয়ান দাহিবাল্লা কি আল্লাহ হইলে অহন বর্মা মাঝে যত মিলিটারি কু গজে রোহিঙ্গার জুলুম করে দিয়ান দুনিয়া মাঝে ইয়ানো আরাতু মুনতো আফুলবো কি আল্লাহ হইলে genocide হদ্দি বাদি কি আকান কু করে দিয়ান তোর বড় ডন উগ্র কোমরে একতরফিয়ার সাথে খতম করে ফেলাদ দি আতাল্লাহ আর রোহিঙ্গার যে জুলুম করে দিয়ান প্রতি জায়গাত ফানি আরাতু হাইলাইট করা আফুলবো কি আল্লাহ Burma মাঝে জুলুম ফাইয়ে হইলে হারাতুল্লাহ কম উগ্র নাই হারাতুল্লাহ জুলুম ফাইতে হনিকে নাই আতাল্লাহ বলি আর কম আল্লাহ যে উগ্র আর কম বলি না অন্য দিল্লা আর উগ্র কম বলি আর তো আবুরু মন্তর রোহিঙ্গা দুল্লা জুলুম গরদ উগ্র কম হনগ্র নাই অহন 21st century মাঝে জেনোসাইড হদিবা ফেস গরদ আতাল্লাহ আর ইয়ানরে জেদুর ভাড়ে দূর ইন্টারন্যাশনাল লেভেল মাঝে হাইলাইট করিবাল্লা আর দেখি অনরা বেগুনে আশা করো Rohingya আর international friend of class অনরা তো হনিতারা দেখি বেগুনে এর ডিসকাস করতে এরে দেখি খোগো মানুষ আছে উগো এদে আখিলা ইবা গ্লোবাল জাস্টিস সেন্টার প্রেসিডেন্ট ইবা দেখি ইবারে মিটিং ইবারে দেখি মডারেট করছে আর উগো দেখি অ্যাম্বাসেডর স্টিফেন রাব বলি হ তো ইবা দেখি ওদের আর ইনসাফাল্লাহ বহুত দুনাদুনি করতে মানুষ তো আর বহুত কিছু এক্সপেরিয়েন্স আছে ইন্টারন্যাশনাল লর বাবতে তো আরগুয়াদি কি এরেন রোজেনবার্গ হইয়ারে ইন্টারন্যাশনাল লিগ্যাল এক্সপার্ট বেশি নামডাক বেশি দেখি লর ইন্টারন্যাশনাল লর গুরে বেশা বেশি বুঝে আরগুয়াদি কি আরসালান সুলাইমান অনরা দেখিবা দেখি জান্ন দেখি ফলি হুকুম মাঝে গ্যাম্বিয়া ইন্টারন্যাশনাল কোর্ট অফ জাস্টিস মাঝে তিয়াই আর বাবদ হতা হইল তো ইবাই এরা আছে তো এর বেকুনে হন্দিলাগুনি আরা ঠেলি ফাইজুম আর দেখি অহন আর ইনসাফ ফাইবাল্লা হদ্দুন আরা কুশিত করি ফাইজুম কুশিত করাত আসি দিয়া না দেখি বেগুনে ইয়ানো থাকা না যে মুশারা যদি কি বলি হইলে অহন নইয়া গুয়া যে এনইউজি হইয়ারে ন্যাশনাল ইউনিটি গভর্নমেন্ট গুয়া ইর বর্মা মাঝি ইবাইয়ে কি হর ইবার বাবদ কি তো ইয়া আনম মাঝে আরা রোহিঙ্গা তরফতু এরা বালা করি ক্লিয়ার গজি ইয়ান দেখি বেশি রোহিঙ্গা ইয়ে হদ হতা বুঝমত কি বলি হইলে এনইউজি ন্যাশনাল ইউনিটি গভর্নমেন্ট যদি ইবা আসছে হই থাকিলে ইবা যদি দুনিয়া লই মিলি হাম করতে থাকিলে ইবা যদি নইয়া বর্মারে নইয়া নিউ বেশন লই দেহে তৈ থাকিলে বেগুনর যদি বর্মার নইয়া গড় নইয়া দেখি হিসাবে বেগুনর গলার দই থাকিলি মাইনরিটি অফ কলরি তারা যদি রাখার দই থাকিলি রোহিঙ্গার দেখি টাইনতা হদ দিয়া নরে তারা তু হামাকা লেখান গরা ফুরব রোহিঙ্গা হদ দিবা নাইনান্তা আপিওয়া ফুল সিটিজেন হদ দিয়া নরে তারা তু লেখান গরা ফুরব আর রোহিঙ্গা যে দেখি মিলিয়ন রোহিঙ্গা অকল আর মাবুইনে জেনোসাইড ফেস করি দাই গিয়ে জেনোসাইড সাফাইভার্স অকল কেমত আসতে ইতারা তারা জায়গা তারা আনা ফুরবো তারারে দেখি গরবানি দিয়া ফুরবো তারা তো যে লুকসানো ইন দিয়া ফুরবো ফুল সিটিজেন তারারে লেখান করা ফুরবো আর কানো এদের জেনোসাইড ওই দিয়ে আনার তারা তো লেখান করা ফুরবো আর কানো এদের ইউএন ফ্যাক্ট ফাইন্ডিং মিশন রিপোর্ট জেন্নার কান গজ্জি রিপোর্টই আনার তারা তো লেখান করা ফুরবো তো ইন যদি তারা যদি দুনিয়ায় রে মুন্তু আনিয়ারে দাহাই ফাইল লিবে এটাই মত কই ফাই জন্য কি বলি হইলে ইতারা আর ওরে ইতারা তো সই নজর আছে দিয়ান কি আল্লাহ আরা আগেও গল হাই আর দেখি আরা গল হাই না ফাইজুম আর কোমল্লা যে আকান আর মানুষ আর কোমল্লা যে বেগুনের দিলা আকান দূরের বেগুনে খুশি করে তারারিও বলদ ইয়ান দেখি বেশি ইম্পর্টেন্ট টাইম আর তু দেখি ন্যাশনাল ইউনিটি গভর্নমেন্ট হতে বা ইয়ে যদি আরে হনত ফুল করি আরে দেখি বেতালা ইউজ করি হন নভারেমান আরা তারা আরা বেগুনে ডিমান্ড করছি তোমারা পলিসি দেখা ফুরব যদি পলিসি ইয়ান যদি দাহাই ফাইল লিবে এটাইমত আরা তারারে সাপোর্ট করি ফাইল না ফাইল বাফি ফাইল মন্তর আরা বর্মার পাবলিকর ফাঁতি আসি তো দেখি বর্মার পাবলিক অকল যে অহন মাইরহার তারার লাইও আরা দেখি ফেরেশানিতে আসি বর্মার মাঝে আরা মিলিটারি লা ফাইট করি হয় মন্তর এনইউজি রে আরা সলিডারিটি দাহাই ফাঁতি আসি মন্তর তারা যদি আরা পলিসি রে দাহাই না ফাইলি পাবলিক পলিসি বা না দাহাইলি আরা কোনদিন এনইউজি ফাঁতি গিয়া বুঝিন ফাইজু যত মাঝ আর কোমরে যত জেনোসাইড এদি যদি অ্যাকসেপ্ট করি না পারি আরা কেঙ্গুরি গভর্নমেন্টই ব্যাপারে রিকগনাইজ করিজুম আর দুন মা বুইনাদের জুলুম করছি দিয়ে আনরে আজ কেই সকলত দে ইনো যদি তারা সাপোর্ট না করে হনদিন আরা গিয়া বুঝিন ফাইজু তারা সাপোর্ট রিকগনাইজ করি না ফাইজুম আর যা 10 লাখ মানুষ খেয়াম মাঝে দুঃখ ফাদ দেয় ইতারারে যদি আনি ফুল রাইট দিয়ারে নোয়ানিলি তারার জায়গা জমিন যাইতো আইতো নো দিলি সিটিজেনশিপের যদি ফুল সিটিজেনশিপ রিকগনাইজ না করে আর হনদিনই বারে গভর্নমেন্টই বারে দিকে সাপোর্ট করি না ফাইজুম রিকগনাইজ মন্তর একখান হতো আর গভর্নমার পাবলিক অহন যেন তারা মিলিটারি লা ফাইট করে তারা ফাঁতি আছে এনইউজির হতো ডিফারেন্ট তো যারা ফাঁতি শুনলেই আর বর্মার অ্যাক্টিভিস্ট আর বর্মার মাঝে হদ্দূর পর্যন্ত ইনক্লুসিভ হওয়া ফুরব রোহিঙ্গাল্লা এনইউজি মাথা ফুরব আর রোহিঙ্গার মাঝে নিউ জেনারেশন অকল হামাকা কান দেখি গুণে মিলিজুলি ইনক্লুসিভ হদ দিয়ে মাঝে মাইনরিটি অকল রাইটস রেসপেক্ট করে দিয়ান হইয়ে তো ইন্দিল্লা নিউ জেনারেশন অকল হইলে আর আল্লাহ দেশল্লাহ সুন্দর হইব আতাল্লাহ বুনি আর মুজলিস মাঝে যাই হতাই ডিসকাস করা গিয়ে তো অনরা জেন্তারা সর অনরারি শুক্রিয়া আর আল্লাহ দোয়া গুজ্জ অনরাল্লাহ আর দোয়া করির বর্মার দেশের ভিতরে আছে যে সলাক আর বাই বই নাই 600,000 জেনোসাইড ফেস করত দি ইনসাইড আরকান স্টেট অনরাল্লাহ আর দোয়া করির আর দেখি বাংলাদেশত আছে দি about a million রোহিঙ্গা জেনোসাইড সার্ভাইভার্স অনরাল্লাহ আর দোয়া করির অনরা আর আল্লাহ দোয়া গুজ্জ আর দেখি অনরাল্লাহ জিন্দিল্লা দুরা ফরিন্দিল্লা আজ যে ইন্টারন্যাশনাল মাঝে অনরার ন ফরা অনরাল্লাহ বেগুনে ইনসাফ ফাইবাল্লাহ হক ফাইবাল্লাহ খুশির গরাত আছে তো দেখি কি বলি হইলে বর্মার খুইলিও কুয়ার ফাঁতি আর হালত আর জেনোসাইডত দিয়ে আর তো হামাকা ইন্টারন্যাশনাল হামাকা হাইলাইট করা ফুরব Ara komal ara jodi nahandili ara jodi noguzulile ar honikya onorar hoklo nudibo atalla begunore assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much, Tumkin. And again, thank you to all of our panelists for your expertise and your contributions. I think it's clear from today's lively and interactive discussion that there a lot of questions remain, and that all of these things that we're talking about now are things that we're going to continue need to talk about, and really be in all of our work, be pushing domestically and internationally. So thank you again, and hopefully we'll all be able to convene again soon to see where progress is at on these issues. So have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much to everyone. Thank you, Akila.
Thank you, everyone.
Rob,
Bye,
thank you,
everyone.
Aaron. Thank you, Aslan. Thank you, Tinza.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Assalamu alaikum.
Bye, everyone.
Also, looking forward to see you all next time.
Number stuff होई ने